Hello everyone and welcome back to the Minecraft myth-busting world. This episode is all about the crossbow, the new projectile weapon added in Minecraft 1.14. I will be conducting all sorts of investigations into this new weapon, what it can do, how its enchantments work in order for us to learn all the things that are to be learnt about it. But first of all, let's start off with some basics. Where can you get your hands on a crossbow? Well, we're in a pillager outpost right now. Obviously the crossbow is the weapon of the pillager. And there is a chest in the pillager outpost. According to the loot table, you'd have a 50% chance of finding one in here. Now, a pillager actually has nothing in its loot table because the act of it dropping its crossbow is hard-coded because it's equipped on the pillager. The chance of getting it is 8.5%, and for each level of looting that you have on your sword, you'll get an additional 1%. You can also obtain a crossbow by trading with villagers. If you look for the Fletcher villager, which uses the fletching table as its point of interest, when it gets to the third level, known as Journeyman, it'll unlock a trade for the crossbow. And then again, when you reach the 5th level, known as Master, you'll be able to get a trade for the crossbow with an enchantment. And of course, I can't miss out the most obvious way to make the crossbow, which is to craft it. And if you're not aware, this is the crafting recipe. Now in this video we are going to get into some more interesting stuff for sure. We're going to take a look at the difference between the bow and the crossbow, but right now we're going to go over the basics of the crossbow. The first thing that you should know is that the arrow gets loaded onto the crossbow, and once it's there, it actually stays there. You can then deselect the item, select it, and shoot whenever you want to. Now this of course can be abused in some ways by leaving a load of preloaded crossbows lying around, and then you can kind of rapid fire them like this, you know, just select them one by one and you can fire off a lot of shots quickly. Now there are 4 different types of projectile that can be loaded onto a crossbow. You have the regular arrow, the spectral arrow, all of the tipped arrows, and then you have the firework rocket. Now when you load your crossbow, there is actually a preference for which projectile it is going to pick, and the offhand will always be first. So you can see we got the rocket right there. The other slots in your inventory are ordered by the number of arrows on the screen, the first one being where the crossbow is. And if you want to load a firework rocket, it will need to be in your offhand. You see, that was a regular arrow. It's not until the firework rocket is in your offhand that it will get loaded onto the crossbow. The next thing I wanted to find out was how much damage the crossbow can do. So I've set up a creeper over here that tells us how many hit points it has, and by attacking it for the first time we can see how much damage is dealt. That time it was 9, and from my experiments I have learned that you can do between 7 and 11. In terms of hearts, that's between 3.5 hearts of damage and 5.5. Now you won't do the same amount each time you attack, it seems to be random. The distribution of this also seems to be even as well. You can do between 7, 8, 9, 10 and 11 points of damage, and the distribution seems to be even. So on average you would do about 4.5 hearts of damage. Now I know some of you are going to point out that you can use tipped arrows to do more damage. That's absolutely true. We've got instant damage 2 here, and it will always do 12 hit points of damage every single time, which I find kind of curious. That's the equivalent of 6 hearts, but we're not here to investigate that. The next thing I want to check out is the firework rocket. And it's actually the ingredients of the firework rocket that are going to determine how much damage you do. So this one right here actually does 0 damage. And that's simply because it's made from gunpowder and paper. And even if you had more gunpowder in, the flight duration has no bearing on how much damage is done. What it actually does are these firework stars. It also doesn't matter what the ingredients of the firework star is, it's each one that's added into the recipe seems to do more damage. And of course you can add all the way up to 7 in total. So these are my rough estimations of how much damage it does. It begins with between 5 to 6, then 6 to 9, 8 to 11, 9 to 12, 11 to 14, 13 to 16, and 14 to 18. You can see it starts to rack up quite a lot of damage. So here's what it looks like when you've got 2 firework stars inside of the rocket. And then when you have a whopping 7, it creates quite a lot of particle effects, especially if you're standing close. Now during my testing I observed something rather strange. The amount of damage you do from these firework rockets is dependent on where you're standing. So if I just pick a spot and I shoot at this, I'll actually consistently do the same amount of damage each time. So we went from 29 to 18 to 7, and then if I do that again we're going to see 29 to 18 to 7 again. So I've moved position and now we get different numbers. We got 30, then 20, then 10, and then 1. We'll do it again. We'll see 30, 20, 10, and 1. It's not the most useful sort of information, but it's just a quirky thing I wanted to share with you. And now I quickly interrupt this video to remind you to subscribe and hit the bell if you haven't done so already and you want to catch more content like this. Also, are you enjoying the video? Because there is more interesting information coming your way. If you want to hit the thumbs up button and support the channel, that's greatly appreciated. Now, let's crack on with it. The next thing I wanted to learn was the difference between the trajectory of the crossbow and the regular bow. And for this, I've come up with something rather cool. It is particle effects. They are being summoned where the arrow travels. Unfortunately, there is a little bit of a limit to where the particle effects display, but what we can do is teleport me to a very precise position where I'm going to face exactly forward, and I'll be very careful not to move my mouse, and then we'll look at this from another angle and simply shoot off into the distance. So here is the crossbow in action, and just behind it a fully drawn bow you can see seems to be slightly weaker. So let's wait for the particles to go. Here's the crossbow. Here is the regular bow, and it's always just slightly under it. So I think that means the crossbow is a little bit stronger. And of course you can shoot the bow at different trajectories, which is kind of fun when you've got silly amounts of particle effects going on. So here is a firework rocket with flight duration 1. I initially thought that something was going wrong with the particle effects, but actually these rockets travel in a straight line, and then after a certain distance they will simply disappear. So I've been shooting a lot of rockets to confirm this, and then getting a rough idea of the range at which they can land in. So when they come over here, I simply look at where they land, and the most extreme example in one direction and the other I've made a marker of, and down here you can see the different markers for the different rocket durations. And in case you wanted to know those exact numbers, rocket duration 1 was 32 to 49 blocks, 2 was 48 to 64, and 3 was 71 to 84, but this was just some crude testing. I only fired about 10 to 15 shots on each one. It's also rather fascinating that these things keep their trajectory perfectly. Gravity isn't coming into play here. As you can see, whatever direction you shoot them at, they simply travel in a straight line. Let's move forward to enchantments. There are 5 that can be put onto a crossbow. We have quick charge 1 to 3, multi-shot, piercing 1 to 4, mending and unbreaking 1 to 3. It's piercing and quick charge that are not compatible with one another. You can have only one of those, but both of them are compatible with multi-shot. And quick charge is actually what I've been using in this video. If you notice, my crossbow was enchanted. That just makes firing a little bit quicker. And we're going to have a closer look at just how much each level does. But a fun fact for you, if you have quick charge level 5, which you can only get using commands, you can actually instant shoot. If I just keep tapping, we just keep shooting as fast as it possibly can. What you're now looking at is video I recorded of myself loading the crossbows. I've edited it down so it captures the beginning and the end of the loading animation, and then I've added a time code as well. Obviously that's pretty tricky to read, so here are the numbers. This is how long it takes to load an unenchanted crossbow. 1.33 seconds. If you have quick charge 1, it's 1.08, 0.85 for quick charge 2, and number 3 is 0.58 seconds. My friends, in myth busting, sometimes I am the cruel experiment. I wanted to find out if the pillagers could make use of these enchantments, and the answer is yes, but not at the same rate that the player does. The one on that side over there has quick draw level 1, and this one has quick draw level 5, and it is definitely shooting faster out of the two of them. That is for sure, but it doesn't shoot instantly, so I'm going to try and give one of them an even higher enchantment. Ah, look at that. I've given this one here level 9, and it's too fast for it to understand what to do with it, it would appear. And here it is again with level 6. So it seems once you give it level 6, it can't actually use the bow, but it does make a difference for the pillager. Next up we have the multi-shot enchantment. This will split the projectile into 3 different projectiles and only cost you a single arrow. So 1 arrow has gone from our inventory, yet if we look at the crossbow, it actually used 3 durability. That is an important thing to note. And I can actually go over here and pick that arrow back up, and the other 2 will remain unpickable. If we go and fire these again, and then walk to this side, you'll see it's always the one in the middle that's the one that you can pick up. If you happen to hit a projectile with one of the arrows on the side, you'll still be able to go over and pick up the arrow from the middle. So this time what we'll do is we'll hit the projectile with the one in the middle, and then when we go to pick an arrow back up, you'll see it's only ever the one in the middle. So this means you can actually damage entities and get your arrow back as long as you use the one that's on the side. Now this enchantment works for all of the projectiles. As you can see, our rockets shoot off into the sky, and if we swap it out for a arrow of harming, a tipped arrow, you'll see when we shoot them into the ground they get split into three. You can also pick the one in the middle back up, so that's a great way to use those types of arrows without actually wasting them. Now when it comes to damage, all three of the arrows fired have the same range of damage, so there is no nerfing here. If you hit 3 entities you would do a similar amount of damage to hitting 3 individually. What's really interesting is that when we hit them with just specifically one of those 3 arrows, we will get the same damage pattern if we were to shoot them over and over again. However, this damage pattern is different for each arrow when you're standing on the same spot. So now if I shoot to the side and hit it with the left arrow, if I were to do this over and over again, I would do the same amount of damage each time. However, it would be different from if I were shooting it with the middle arrow. Now you might be thinking this means we can get real close and shoot a creeper with 3 of these at the same time. That's not what's going to happen. As you can see here, 2 of them will actually bounce back off of the creeper. And that means that you can't do 3 times the damage on a single entity. And now it's time to put myself in the line of fire again. I've summoned in a pillager. This guy is multi-shot. And yeah, look at that. It works on the pillager as well. Awesome. Next up we have the piercing enchantment. Each level of this will allow you to shoot through an entity and hit another one. So piercing 1 allows you to hit 2 entities. I'm going to just demonstrate all of them to you. Here you can see 2 of the creepers got hit. Piercing 2 will hit 3 of them, 3 will hit 4, and 4 will hit 5. So you know what's next, right? I've got myself a cheaty enchanted bow down here. It's got piercing X on it, and this actually goes beyond the survival limit. So I've summoned in a whole bunch of creepers, and when I shoot, you'll see it will go through all of them, and all of them take damage. And speaking of damage, when you're using this enchantment, the damage isn't affected at all. It's just applied individually to each of the creepers, which is why they're taking different amounts of damage. And once again, I find myself as the human guinea pig here. Let's hope this pillager's a good shot. Yep, he's a good shot. And of course I got to do that again with it having the piercing 10 bow. And that did more entities, and it did all of them. Wow, so it even works on other mobs. So I've read the Minecraft wiki, and apparently there is an exception for end crystals. However, as you can see, both of those just blew up. And to demonstrate it was the piercing effect, this one doesn't chain blow up the next one. The wiki also claims this doesn't work on armor stands as well, so let's give it a try. No, it clearly does work on armor stands. So those are the enchantments covered, and now we're going to go over some interesting questions and facts about the crossbow. You're probably aware you can use a grindstone to put these back together. You get a 5% durability bonus. You can do this in the crafting bench as well and still get that bonus for repairing them. However, you can also use loaded ones as well. And as you'll see here, it just gives you an unloaded crossbow in return. So even if you use 2 with the same projectile, you're always going to get one without. You can also use the crossbow as fuel, and regardless of what durability it has or what projectile is loaded, it will always smelt 1.5 items. The crossbow also has 4 unique advancements. That one was Arbalistic, which you get for killing 5 mobs with 1 shot. The first one is for simply shooting a crossbow. This one is for killing a pillager with a crossbow. And this one for killing 2 phantoms with a single piercing arrow. So the entire time I've been recording this episode, there have been pigmen spawning from this portal over here, and it's got me wondering if they will detect that this is from the player, because it's explosive damage that's going to hit them. And as you can see, this pigman has indeed been angered, or has it? It was just walking towards me. The other theory I had is if you were to hit the ground nearby, that would then apply damage to them, but they wouldn't know it was from me. But you can hit them directly, it'll apply damage to them, and they won't be angry at the player. Now this is what I just love about the Myth-busting series. Today we have learned that there is a weapon we can use to fight zombie pigmen without them getting angry at us. Of course, if the devs see this, they are probably going to patch it out of the game. There is another mob in this game you might consider doing this test on. That is the Enderman. You can see they teleport away from the explosive damage, but they have taken no damage. These are special Endermen that I've summoned in. They have the lowest amount of health. So we can then verify that this isn't actually doing any damage to them. So the next thing I want to show you is that pillagers can use firework rockets, but like the player, they need to have them in their offhand. So I've summoned this one in here, having 2 rockets in its offhand. And so it loads up the rocket, it shoots me with it, it loads up another one, and now you'll see there are no rockets in its offhand, and it starts shooting regular arrows. Learning how to summon in that firework rocket with the pillager led me to learn you can actually customize the color of the firework rocket using a value, so not using dyes and being locked to specific colors. You can see here a very subtle fade of bright red to dark red from left to right, and that's because I can actually set the color value, and this probably goes into the millions. So with commands you can make any shade of color from your firework rocket. Now I know this question was going to get asked, so here it is. We've got multi-shot and piercing on the bow together using cheaty commands. You can't do this in survival, but you can actually use both of them together in creative mode. Now I've done some extensive testing here. It might not be 100% clear, but I can actually hit these entities with multiple arrows, and those arrows will actually use the piercing effect and go through multiple entities. So based on the piercing level, you could multiply that by 3 for the multi-shot, and that's how many entities you could hit with 1 arrow, which is kind of crazy. Now while we're in the business of doing cheaty stuff with commands, it is possible to give yourself a crossbow with a loaded projectile. Now this projectile actually has 3 different ones built into it, so even though we don't have the multi-shot enchantment, we can actually fire off 3 different rockets because of the information that is stored. So one of those was a rocket, one of those was a spectral arrow, and another one was a tipped arrow of weakness. Let's fire that one more time. There you go, and that's what you can do with commands. So we are almost at the end of the episode, but I have one more thing I want to share with you. And first of all, I'd like to say a thank you to Alex Cubed and to Vales for helping with the command blocks and the information that you're about to learn about. So if you saw our recent episode of Myth Busting about the grindstone, we looked into what XP you would actually get from disenchanting these enchantments, and that didn't cover the new ones for the crossbow. So I've got that information, and just to give you a reminder, it takes the first number and gives between 50 to 100% of that in XP points. So on the screen are those numbers right there for you, and you can use that to figure out how much XP you'd get from these enchantments in a grindstone. And that, my friends, is where we wrap up this episode. So leave a like if you've enjoyed it, and check out the video about the grindstone, although it's also about how much XP you can store inside of a shulker box. That'll be on the screen, and of course in the comments down below, hashtag mythbusting, and then follow it with your question. I'll see you very soon with another one. Thank you, peeps. Bye bye.